Well, let me just begin with a couple of opening statements for those who are watching. We're interviewing today Mr. Rex Hagon, who was born in Toronto, a graduate of the University of Toronto with a degree in sociology, has had really a broad career in television over 42 years, and is now a businessman. But starred for many people who remember you in Forest Rangers as Peter Keeley. And I was interested to find out that that was the first show made and broadcasted in color in Canada. And then, of course, fondly remembered as a host on many TVO shows, including Polka Dot Door and the Science Alliance. And that's where I think we're going to place our focus to begin with. So thank you, Mr. Hagan, for taking the time to do this. And let me jump.
Let's start off with that with Rex, okay? Because this makes me sort of feel even.
Sounds good, Rex.
Thanks.
Well, let's jump right in and talk a little bit about the Polka Dot Door.
Sure.
I wrote down some quotes here. The Academy of Canadian Cinema and Television call Polka Dot Door a groundbreaking children's educational series that changed the nature of children's television programming and impacted countless young Canadians raised in the international profile of the Canadian television industry. And it was the first Canadian kids show to be syndicated in the U.S. So without a doubt, this show has had a monster impact, and anybody growing up in Canada that was born in the 70s, 60s, or even the 80s, as I was, remembers the Polka Dot Door.
Are you sure about the fact that it would have been the first syndicated series? Or there were so many others that came from CBC earlier. I would have thought that, now, I don't know about the syndication piece, but I think of Dress Up and I think of Friendly Giant and all the rest of those.
Right. Apparently, from the information I have, it was the first Canadian kids show to be syndicated. But that does surprise me as well, because I know Friendly Giant and Mr. Dress Up were huge as well.
They're iconic shows as much as Polka Dot Door, and I'd also want to give a tip of the hat to those shows that were around before Polka Dot Door.
Right. And then, of course, down in the States, 1969 Sesame Street, and then Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood shortly after that, which I'm sure were around at the same time and impacting your work as well.
Yeah.
Bring us back to the genesis of Polka Dot Door in terms of how you remember it. I remember we talked earlier today, and I was mistaken in that you weren't there right from the beginning, but more so in the mid-'70s. But bring us back to what you know about the genesis of the show, and when did you first hear about it, and what was the pitch that was brought to you to be involved with it?
The genesis of the show, I can't speak to because it was up and running when I heard about it. And I was very busy in a number of other shows, whether for CBC or independently. I knew there was a show on TVOntario that was dealing with kids. Nina was on it. We talked about it. It seemed like it would be fun. And I have to be candid, my impetus for actually getting on the show was, holy smoke, this show's been around for a couple of years. No one's been asking me to be on it. I can sing, I can dance, I'm good. I think I can manage this. And so with a healthy degree of chutzpah, I outreached through George Bourne at the TVOntario. He was a little reluctant, but I was pushy enough. I said I'd like a meeting with Coneybear. Give me an opportunity. And the director of the show was there. And they said, okay. And they weren't holding auditions otherwise. But you could put it in context. I mean, here was this actor coming in who I clearly had quite a profile from a whole bunch of other shows. There was no doubt about that.
Mm-hmm.
Coming in wanting to do the audition and didn't have a set sort of songs to do. I don't know. I might even have done, "Oh Canada" or "Happy Birthday," something really like unimaginative. But they said, "Well, can you read this story?" And they read it as if you were reading it to a child, and then can you describe how something works? Well, I love kids, and I knew I was really good at that. And one of the strengths that I had as a performer was able to look into the camera and people know I'm talking to them, and particularly kids. And so I just turned it on. I said, okay, guys, and to these grown men in the room, I turned it on. And from that, I was then graced with an opportunity to be on the show. And I did, I guess, about 5 years worth.
Was Polka Dot Door your first show for TV Ontario? And if you were to put a year in terms of your audition and the years that you were on it, could you give us kind of a rough? I know sometimes that gets foggy, but if you remember, what years would have you started?
Well, I would certainly, I'd certainly put it somewhere like 75. And the distance between the audition and actually being on the show, it would only have mattered as to when they shot. The series was shot in a clump, so they might have done we did 2 shows a week, so they would only have done a relatively small clump of shows in a season.
Right.
And I can't remember the exact.
Right.
And maybe I went in November and actually ended up being on the show when they started production in April or May.
And was this the first show that you did with TV Ontario?
I don't know for sure. It can't be. Couldn't possibly be. I knew TV Ontario. I knew George Bourne as a casting director.
Mm-hmm.
We had a relationship. There were a number of other shows that I would have been called on to do that weren't as ending up as long-lasting. They would have been one-off kind of things, or a narration to a storybook of some kind. So I know I've had, embarrassing, I can't think of any of the shows, but I had a long relationship with TVO, or OECA as they were called, back when they were on Bayview Avenue, I think it was, in some relatively small building. And Polka Dot Door came on, when it came up, it sort of ramped up my relationship with TVO.
Very cool, very cool. You mentioned how you had a unique kind of introduction into being on Polka Dot Door. Afterwards, how were additional hosts hired? Like, how were they sought out? Was that just the job of the casting director to look for hosts, and was there a process to that you were aware of?
Well, jaundiced as I was, I gathered the process wasn't quite very robust because I hadn't been included in it earlier. You know what? When I did the show, and again, I'm not being boastful here. It's just a question that I know I did a good job,
Right.
And as a result, I got more weeks, if you will, and that turned out to be a curse later, which we'll talk about. But I got more weeks, and so the hostess, the girl on the show, might change.
Right.
And they would bring in, as to how they casted those individuals, I really don't know. It would a lot on reputation, quite honestly, in terms of their own TV queue, if you will.
The late Ted Coneybear was the creator of Polka Dot Door. You've mentioned him once already. Tell us about Ted and your memories of him.
I remember him as being a very thoughtful man. I see his round face, always with a good smile, but not a frivolous smile. There was a lot of depth behind him. Very caring for the show, very much taking ownership for the show. It was his baby. The toys were sacrosanct. You didn't get on the set and fool around, like you might think people would do today. So Coneybear was really he was the holder of a standard, a very high standard for the show. It didn't mean he wasn't fun, and it didn't mean he wasn't a pleasant guy, but there was a line of quality, and he wanted to make sure that it was maintained in everything we did, from the singing to the arts and crafts kind of thing. So I had a lot of respect for Ted.
Was he well respected amongst the other staff at TV Ontario at the time as well?
I believe so.
Was he given a long leash in terms of being able to run with this show? From what I understand, and this kind of leads into my next question, were you aware of the similarities or the fact that Polka Dot Door was an adaptation from the BBC show Play School? And did you watch any of those episodes to gain an understanding on how to approach your role?
I knew it was part of the BBC. I thought it was Blue Peter. Was it Play School? Was that what it was called?
It was Play School, yeah.
All right. I knew about the show, did not watch it. I don't know what. Well, I guess really, what we take for granted, our access now to shows internationally. And it's just interesting, even as I think about it, now we can get on YouTube and get something no matter what. You think of some of that old footage that you got of some of that other work I've done. The 70s, you just couldn't do that easily. But that doesn't mean that I was curious and I failed in my curiosity. It didn't seem to be relevant. We had our own show. It was modeled after. We'll do our bit.
Well, you know what? It's funny you mention that. We'll talk about this a little later in the interview, but you would think that some of the material, from your tenure at TVOntario, even Polka Dot Door, would be readily available. But sadly, the vaults are closed.
Yeah,
And they're
don't be onto that.
Yeah.
That's really sad. I mean, if you think of the work that was done at CBC, which was even longer,
Yeah.
and not just me, but a lot of other actors, there's work there that is bye-bye. It's gone.
Was there anything uniquely Canadian about Polka Dot Door in comparison to Play School? I know you mentioned you didn't actually see it, but were there things that you brought to the show or things that Coneybear insisted on that were uniquely Canadian?
You know what? I think, Travis, it'd be interesting to more likely compare that to, say, the American offerings.
Mm-hmm.
So what was uniquely Canadian about us? There really was an authenticity that was brought. I mean, I look at some of the old shows now, and even a couple of clips. The pacing was real slow. It was not your flashy American pacing. Some might argue too slow, but it was done at an an educational level for the kids that would be watching it. So was there something uniquely Canadian? I can't compare it. I mean, my father was British, so I think I might be biased to say that we maintained the very high standards that they would have done over there, and uniquely Canadian in that we had integrity and really played it seriously and played it to the kids that were watching.
We talked earlier about how...
Biased, I hope, against any sort of counterpart. Don't get me wrong.
We were talking earlier today about who designed the Polkaroo costume, and you cited Tanya Petrova from the Wikipedia staple. Any idea who designed the dolls that were used, the Humpty Dumpty, Marigold, and Bear?
Okay.
There were some rumors that said that it was traditionally the male host that would dress up in the Polkaroo costume. However, there were some other rumors that said that Ted himself would get into it if the male actor was not tall enough. Do you have any memories of that? And were you ever inside the Polkaroo costume?
Geez, I don't know whether we're supposed to disclose that. Just try to look at my non-disclosure agreement here. I have it here. All right. Okay, this is a spoiler alert. Okay, spoiler alert. It was imaginatively done. The male host, any male host, was the guy who was in that costume. Period. And it got to be a pretty classic line, oh, darn, I missed him again, that kind of thing. But I love doing the Polkaroo costume, and the character. Again, to give you kind of a backstory, one of the reasons why I really pushed to be on the show was that I knew I loved children's programming, and I knew that I had a strength in that area. In some ways, I had a vision that, well, maybe I'll even gain some notoriety along the lines of Mr. Rogers in that capacity. I just had an affinity to that side of the business. And so when I was successful in the audition, put myself 100% in it, like to think that I was successful in that because I garnered, sooner than other performers, duplicate weeks. So a sign of your popularity was that you would be given multiple weeks. Never a lot. They didn't want it to go to our head. The stars were the toys. That was made abundantly clear. Yeah, what's that, Marigold? No, I know you were good. I was pretty good too. Anyway, long and short of it was, when I got in the Polkaroo costume, again, I wanted to really embody what that character could potentially be. I mean, with authenticity and with reality, not just sort of the obvious bit with a head is bouncing at the back of the, you can see the person's face. So, long story short, love the character of the Polkaroo. Yes, I did it, and many an actor did it. Don't ever recall Ted Coneybear being in the costume. He was well, I guess he might have fitted into it. He was a slightly larger man.
Was the voice of Polkaroo always the actor that was inside of it?
Yes, Travis, and I think you'll remember that in the early days, the dialogue that the Polkaroo had was really extensive. It ran the full gamut from Polkaroo to a happy Polkaroo, So it really ran a gamut there, which was the test of every actor doing it.
An extensive language vocabulary as well, I have to say.
Big. Often had to do voice coaching just to kind of get it right.
Rex, you've mentioned this a little bit already. Maybe you can go into some more detail of what you remember. Help us understand how the show was shot. And did you shoot in blocks of episodes? How many at a time?
Right. So you'd be hired for a week. You would shoot 2 shows in that week. And pretty much you would shoot, if they were in, say, by the clock and the chair, then you would shoot, say, episode 1 and 2 that relates to being in the chair, but maybe we would have changed our shirt or dress or whatever. That just made the shooting, they sort of, what would be called a checkerboard approach. They would never do any more than that. They wouldn't, say, shoot 5 episodes in the chair, reading 5 stories. The show pretty much was taped, as I recall it, pretty much to time, if you will, in those days. You start a show, you're going to tape it, okay, they had a timing thing. They weren't as geared as the commercial market to really be doing multiple shots, set it up, we got a big setup. And it wasn't very complicated setup. There was a 3-camera shoot generally. The sound man's on his trolley overhead, and you'd shoot it in that way.
Was this studio in TVOntario?
They used a studio out on Lakeshore Studios, Lakeshore West, for a while, and then TVOntario was built. So there was a bit of a studio at TVOntario at Bayview, but it was pretty nasty. Then they moved out to Lakeshore, which had a bigger facility for all the sets and stuff. And then they created the studio at TVOntario.
We talked about the years. We guessed that it would be in the mid to late 70s. Do you remember how many episodes you did? Even a guess.
It's in the form of weeks, and so in terms of the weeks, I guess in my 5 years, I would have done 10 or 20.
And when
that's an interesting question. And again, this is sort of the background of the show. So we have all the glory of the show. It was fabulous, and we can wax eloquent on that. And as an actor, there was another side to it, and that was that when we would do a week's worth, I'm up for a week, so I do 2 shows. So in 1 week we do 2 shows, and I maybe get in a year, I might get 3 weeks, right? So if you take a week's worth of shows, 5 shows, we do the 10 or the 15. Because of the agreement that TVOntario had with ACTRA, our union, they could, and for all the right reasons, because it was educational, play the show ad nauseum. Play the show as many times, which is why, Travis, you remember it so well, because it was on at all kinds at the time. But what that meant was, as an actor, when I went out for other auditions and other work, a director who would be hiring me for a serious role or something in a non-broadcast business sense, invariably would, oh, my kids love you on Polka Dot Door. And so for me, it was a challenge. I wasn't getting the volume of work from the show that justified giving up other work. And yet I was going to auditions, and it was compromising my success ratio for those jobs. But again, I'm not complaining about it. It was just a reality of of being a successful actor in a niche market. But that niche market wasn't a volume player. It wasn't a big dollar earner. I did it for love.
When did you record your final episode, if you were to guess a year, and was it sad to leave the show when you did?
I don't recall the exact date, but I would picture it somewhere around probably 79, 80. I didn't know it was my last show, and it wasn't the last show of the series. It was merely, we're not going to have you back, and they moved on to other players, and they changed the format a bit.
Who designed and decorated the set, and did it change through your years that you were there, or even between blocking shoots?
Coneybear kept that pretty darn consistent. It was very simple. They used in the garden. They'd use a lot of sort of blue screen stuff so that they could superimpose. It didn't change much, or at least not when I was there. It didn't change much. When they got into doing Polka Dot Door shorts,
right,
they changed the format a bit. I think they animated the puppets a bit more, and so they got a little bit more action in that regard. They added a character too, as I recall. I think they added the Storytime mouse or something, and there was a character that was added subsequent to us.
Now, just out of curiosity, where did the door lead? Was it just backstage? Is that where it would go? And did the actual holes on the polka dot door really open up?
Imagine yourself on the set of Polka Dot Door. There's a door. You open it. That door just went nowhere, Travis. I'm sorry. I can't put it any blunter. There was a camera that would be positioned around the sort of the side or back of the set, if you will. That's the camera that would pick up the opening shot for the door. It would kind of pull back, but they'd be superimposing other credits over it. And either then the door would flap open and the camera lens would kind of go through the door, cut to another camera already inside.
And you know what, you mentioned the credits. It was funny, through its whole tenure, they kept the animation, which I assume was probably the original animation when the show started in 71, because it looks old. Yeah, exactly. You know, when I interviewed Clive Vanderberg, he was telling me how, you know, when he was making today's special, they changed the costume of Noreen Virgin after the two pilots, but she wore the old costume in the opening sequence, and he said it just cost so much to do that animation in the opening sequence of today's special that they couldn't justify reshooting the credits to reflect the costume change. So I expect it was probably a similar reason why they never updated that.
Ontario, I mean, let's face it. I mean, it was the provincial network, and they weren't rolling in money. You did not work on TVOntario because you were trying to make money as an actor.
Right. Well, as we talk about the opening there, do you know who created or sung the theme that was heard every day?
I don't.
That's another funny thing.
Did you ask that question?
Pardon me?
Did you ask Nina Keogh that question?
I need to. I really do. I haven't asked her yet, but it's a really significant thing, only because that silly theme song is embedded in the minds of so many people. It's incredibly memorable. Another question, and I'll have to ask Nina this because I know that she was there from the beginning. It started in 1971. Was it probably broadcast in color right from day one?
I would think so, yes.
Right. Did you work on the Polka Dot Door record that was produced, the LP?
I did.
And what do you remember about those recording sessions? How did that project come about?
Arundel Records. We had a great time. It was good fun. I still have them.
I think I actually have a copy somewhere as well.
I do. I pulled out the album up at our cottage. I showed the kids, and it was kind of corny, but it was lovely. We had a good time doing that.
And didn't that involve multiple hosts as well coming together? Dennis Simpson and some of those other folks coming together. Was there any plans to do any more at the time, or was it just kind of like a one project thing?
Verendal hoped they would, but they never did.
Okay. And how did that project even come about? Was that just an initiative from that outside Verendal company?
Well, Verendal had a number of products. Children's books and children's records. Sharon, Lois, and Bram comes to mind. And one other, doesn't matter. Very much focused on the children's market. I don't know, but I would guess that Barenthal approached TVO and said, here's an opportunity, we'll produce it, we'll whatever it, you do the quality control on it, we'll share the royalties of the sales on it. I think that was the case on that.
Was there any other Polka Dot Door merchandising aside from the LP that you remember during your tenure with the show?
Well, there was. There was an initial effort. Ruth Vernon, I think, got approached to do a live Polka Dot Door. And indeed, they did something live. It was more around the sort of a shopping center Christmas moment. And they took the toys out. They did a bit. I don't know to what degree. It wasn't a lot. And I said to myself, this is a good opportunity. And so I approached Ruth Vernon and I said, I'd like to put on the show and make it as a fundraiser for organizations. Use us as the vehicle. And they said, what did you have in mind? I said, well, I've approached an organization. It was a Jewish organization that raised money for children and doing various things. They wanted basically to hire the show. And so I made an agreement with Ruth Vernon. I said, well, let me put something on. Well, before you can do that, Rex, there's a lot of rights and copyrights and blah, blah, blah. I said, okay. So I drew up an agreement, a contract. It was an amazing work, this whole piece. And what happened out of it was that I ended up mounting a show at the Minkler Auditorium here in Toronto. And it was really successful. We had something like 3,000 people showing up for the show. We did 2 shows. I clearly was the host. I would disappear. I put the costume on, came in, great success. They sold a lot of the records because I was marketing and merchandising the records afterwards. And then I got some other offers and it started to grow. Well, I soon got called into the office of Ruth Vernon, and she said, Rex, I see that you're producing the show, you're directing it. I see that you also wrote the script for the show, and you're acting in it. You've got to spread it around. You've got to hire other people. I said, Ruth, there's no money in it unless I'm doing it myself. And so it was really with disappointment that it just was not economically viable. And it wasn't that I was egotistical on it. It's just, it made a lot more sense. I was good at doing that, and it didn't make sense hiring a lot of other people. So we parted companies on the live show, but I would like to take credit because subsequent to that, the show did do quite a number of other live shows. So that was my contribution to getting Polka Dot Door out of the studio. But they wanted to hold on more to the money of it because they took over the whole process themselves.
It's very interesting. Now, would that have been in the late 1970s that would have happened?
Yeah.
Very good. Now, we've talked about her already. From what I understand, Nina Keogh has been a great friend. Did she ever co-host Polka Dot Door with you?
No, she did not.
But you guys did work together on some other CBC shows and some other... Tell me a little bit about your memories of Nina.
We are lifetime friends. Her parents, as you would have learned, John and Linda Keogh, puppeteers in the early days of CBC, did any number of shows, and the list is endless. I had the opportunity as a child's actor, so I started when I was 5 and a half. And so the shows that I would do, whether it was coming on to Howdy Doody, whether it was Whistletown or Maggie Muggins or any of the early CBC shows, John or Linda Keogh would be the puppeteers.
Right.
Nina would be often coming on set to be with them, to whatever, not to work. And so we knew one another, just to know them, know one another professionally. And we then came many years later to work together under a show called Drop In. And that's where we worked very closely together as host and co-host.
I think I sent it to you. She was able to find one picture from the original first season of Polka Dot Door of her holding Marigold, and I was just struck by how stunning she was as a young woman, and clearly passionate about what she was doing.
Very much so.
When you think back on Polka Dot Door, do you sense that at the time that you were being part of the cultural phenomenon that it's become, and do people still recognize you from the show?
No, they used to. They went through a lot of years of being recognized by it. But actually, I'll get much more recognition from the Forest Rangers, even now.
Were you aware that out of the clips that TVO has released of kind of vintage stuff, there's one 30-second clip that's on YouTube, and out of all the clips that they could have released, they actually released one that you're in. And
And thank you for showing me.
talk to me about how you feel about the scarcity of this material, and obviously there's good reasons for copyright reasons in the way that the contracts were made, and Clive Vanderberg has taken a long time to explain this all to me. But is there still not a part of you that's sad that this material is forever locked up, really, in the vaults of TVO?
It is sad. There's just some really good work there. Whether or not people want to see all the shows, there were some very good performers on the show, very talented people doing a good job, and it pains me to think that a lot of work by Canadian artists, Canadian actors, is locked away in similar vaults, or in fact, as we talked about earlier with the CBC, those early kinescopes have been just destroyed.
From what I've been told, and this kind of even makes it even more bitter, is not only is it locked away, but apparently it has been properly preserved. From what I understand, there's an archivist at TVOntario, and all the U-matic film has actually been transferred. Apparently they hold a library for every episode of Polka Dot Door, and it's all been transferred and digitized, but it just
Really, no one can see it.
No one can see it. It's just to have it kind of locked away in the museum there. I've recently been...
Fine, I'm not going to let you see it. Isn't that funny?
Which is pretty much what we're facing. You know, we're writing this article for Blog TO, and I've been in contact with the folks there at TVOntario, just painstakingly kind of trying to, at this point right now, all I'm asking for is some screenshots of maybe even the pilot episode. Like, I realize that copyright may not allow you to release clips, and of course you wouldn't want to give those to a person in the public because they could end up somewhere else. I get all that, but could we not get like 4 or 5, computer screenshots? And that's kind of what I've been whittled down to asking for, because none of it exists, and sadly, and one of the reasons why I told you why we're doing this Skype session is to honor folks like you and folks like Nina and Clive and so many others that have just given such a tremendous amount of their time and life to educating Canadian children. And sadly, there's not books written about it. There's not media produced on it. It seems to be something that's lost. And I'm trying to do my part as someone who has a hobby in archiving and history to turn that around a little bit and to honor these folks while they're still with us, and while they can recall a lot of these things. We mentioned already Ted Coneybear, and of course Dennis Simpson passed away a couple of years ago from a brain hemorrhage. And there's just not enough being done to preserve it. So it's very sad. As we wrap up talking about Polka Dot Door, did you have a favorite episode or a favorite memory? Maybe a couple of favorite memories, something funny that maybe have happened on the show, or something that was memorable.
I always loved the imagination, the whole sort of imagine, you can imagine. I loved that. Used to do it with my own kids when they were small, making up words. That was a part of the show that I loved. Oh, I do have something I can tell you.
Okay.
Okay, so it was Animal Day. And on Animal Day, we had a young boy come in who was very proud, and he was going to show us his gerbil. And we had a little box set up with sawdust, and we even had somebody from the Science Center, the zoo, the somewhere, some expert, was going to come in. And this boy is standing off camera, just proud as punch that his gerbil is going to be Used. Okay. So the hostess is there. It's non-sexist. We have to have the hostess. She's holding the gerbil and bites her a little bit. She drops it, freaks out a little bit, enough that we have to stop tape. She cannot pick this up again. She just, Rex, can you come in and do it? No problem. Here's how you hold a gerbil. So to hold a gerbil, particularly for camera, you want to shove a close-up, you've got to put the gerbil's tail between your fingers, right? You put the gerbil's tail nicely between the fingers, clamp your fingers, right? So the tail's down here, gerbil's up here, you can hold it, pat its back, let the camera get a shot, because these are big old cameras, they're not mobile like city TV kind of stuff. Okay, holding the, well, my God, this gerbil on my hand. First of all, it bites me. Oh, I'm not going to say anything. Oh, it just gave me a little nip, I said. Like hell. Anyway, this gerbil starts turning on my hand. Oh, look at that. Oh, he's turning on my hand. And all of a sudden, the gerbil jumps off my hand. Only its tail is still between my fingers.
Oh, no.
It had worked its tail off. Obviously, it was scared. Obviously, this is how gerbils escape. When they're caught by their tail, they can kind of separate their tail. Well, the memory I have to this day is of this young boy in the darkness, off camera, eyes wide, mouth agape, as its gerbil's tail is left hanging. What do you say?
Oh,
what do you say to the kid at this moment?
Sorry about your gerbil.
Yeah. Oh, that was one story that you carry on. I don't know whether we scrapped it or, just talked about gerbils or showed a little book of gerbils.
That's a great story, and it reminds me, I'd forgotten about the part of the set, and I don't know if it was there in your day, but certainly in the episodes that I remember, there was that kind of set this to the side of the sandbox was almost like a shed in a barn where items were kept, and they had little animals and stuff like that they'd bring out sometimes.
Exactly.
We mentioned this earlier, but sadly, no pictures or video from your time there
No.
that you've retained.
I don't have anything, and again, you know what? I look back on it. It was an iconic piece. It was fun. I love seeing the episodes. Nina was very good about getting some episodes of drop-in from the VTR and giving me some of those. But oh boy, it's a bit painful to look back on seeing myself as a 20-plus-year-old.
Now, aside from the clips that are now on YouTube, you would have been done the show in around 1980. From 1980 till now, did you ever see any clips, or would you ever turn on the TV and see yourself or footage from your time on Polka Dot Door?
Oh yeah, no, that was part of the problem. Long after I'd finished actually doing the show and actually getting paid to do the show, the episodes were still playing vigorously. And so to everybody figured I was really busy. Wow, you're really busy, TVOntario. Holy cow. No, I shot that 4 years ago. Thank you.
Now, the episodes of Polka Dot Door, they were 30 minutes long, is that correct?
28, whatever, yeah.
28, right. Now, let's talk a little bit about TVOntario. One of the things that Nina had mentioned that I had not heard before, and I don't know if you recall this just from your time there, she said even before it was called the OECA, Ontario Education Communications Authority, that it had the name ETV and Meta. Do you remember a time when it was called that?
ETV, I remember. The Meta, I don't.
We were interested to find that out. Some have suggested that TVOntario was a pioneer in leading children's education. Clive Vanderberg, when I interviewed him, described the 1970s at TVOntario as a very experimental and creative time. How would you describe the atmosphere at TVO during that and the family of people that you worked with?
Well, they certainly had a vision. They were very much, obviously, tied into the educational system, the provincial educational bodies, etc. So when I mentioned earlier about quality control for any shows that we were doing, but I'm not sure the word innovative, I'm not sure that But I guess in its own way, the fact that they were putting the programs on in the first place, programs that would not necessarily be commercial entities, or at least perceived as commercial entities. They weren't structured or shot as having commercials in them and making money off them. So very much in that regard was a public service. And it was exciting, I think, back on it. I mean, everybody in the organization was really proud about being there and proud about the work, right from the people on camera to the people behind the camera and creating the shows or shooting the shows. It was a lovely atmosphere. It was a very positive atmosphere. I mean, I have to say that it was it any how much different was it? Excuse me, from CBC. I think the TVOntario of the day would have been kind of that same energy that must have surfaced at City TV when it was first starting, and Moses Neimer and all that stuff. You know, there's an edginess and an excitement, and hey, we're doing the show. And
Well, and that leads us to my next question. What was it like working in Toronto TV in those days? Because there were so many revolutionary innovations coming out. You know, Moses and Neimer, like you mentioned, with City TV starting on Channel 59 in 1972. And then, of course, the Second City television comedy troupe was coming out during that time. What was the vibe like being an actor in Toronto at the time? Can you describe that for us?
well, what was very exciting and it's interesting to put it in perspective was that on Drop-In that Nina and I did, we had John Candy, we had Eugene Levy, we had them on the show as young, funny guys, young comedians. Who knew where they were going to go? Same thing, we had Burton Cummings, or we had Doug Henning. There were a number of people who, at the time, I kind of look back and I have regret because I don't think I personally made as much use of talking to them and getting to know them as I might have. It was just they were a guest on the show. They did their thing. So what was it like? In many ways, it was happening, and it was just happening, and it was the moment. It wasn't. There wasn't a self-realization of, oh my God, this is happening. So to say, ooh, these are very exciting times. They were very busy. There was a lot of work happening. From the public service in terms of TVOntario to CBC to commercial work. Film work always had the American slant on it and actors having trouble getting major roles, but there was a lot of stuff happening. So it was exciting, but it was only more exciting in hindsight to see all the stuff that was happening. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Now, you'd mentioned that you had been part of TVOntario probably before your time at Polka Dot Door in the early 70s. Was there a time when you remember that you had stopped working for them? Because I want to talk a little bit more about some of the other shows you did for them. But did you work for them throughout the 80s as well?
I must have done, Travis. I don't specifically recall. Science Alliance certainly was after Polka Dot Door. Again, it was a very, as you saw, if you've seen the clip there, a good show in its time, and kids really loved it. It was a very popular show. It played for ages.
Well, you know what? I remember having to watch that in grade school. It was part of there was a curriculum release with it, and I remember watching it in grade school.
There you go.
Were there any other educational shows that you were a part of during that time that you can remember off the top of your head?
No, I don't think there were actually. Maybe one-off kind of stuff, but nothing from a series point of view.
We had talked about a couple of personalities already, and I've mentioned a number of times Clive Vanderberg. Do you remember Clive from back in your days in the 70s and 80s, or did your time not really overlap?
No, Nina knew him a lot better. I mean, knew of him. He was quite an influential figure. I met him, but very briefly. I didn't have that close relationship.
Who were some of the personalities that had the largest impact on you while you were in those early days at TVOntario?
As actors or just people in general?
Both. As many names as you can remember. I'm always fascinated to hear of those who have had an impact. It could be a producer, it could be a director, someone in the administration, a fellow actor?
I don't know, maybe my brain's fuzzing out, and I'm not suggesting I wasn't grateful and appreciated who I was working with. I don't have a name that jumps out at me, and it's not because there weren't larger-than-life figures there.
Mm-hmm.
The writers, some of the writers that were working at TV Ontario, again, names aren't coming to me, but I just remember the work that they put into what they were doing. It was always very careful and thoughtful. I just remember that, and it's interesting. I guess I put Ted Coneybear up there just as an icon, as somebody who I saw his professionalism, I saw his creativity. In many ways, I saw the business side of show business with him.
Mm-hmm. One of the other notable writers that we hear often as we've done some of this research is a gentleman by the name of Jed Mackay. Did you ever have any interaction with Jed?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had the pleasure of dating his sister when we were much younger. And then when Jed and I met again when he was at TV Ontario. Bright, talented man. I only worked very briefly with him because he was coming in after me, but very creative. Have you reached out to him at all?
I have reached out to him. I'm waiting to hear back. There have been some text interviews that have been done. When we're done with our interview, I'll probably off camera pick your brain and see if there's some other personalities. But he is definitely one I'd love to chat with. Clive Vandenberg speaks wonderfully of him. Jed Mackay wrote a great deal of episodes of today's special and helped Clive compose a lot of the music.
And Polka Dot Door.
Yeah, and Polka Dot Door as well. I know that he was one of the producers and writers throughout the 80s, so he's definitely someone that would be of great interest to speak with.
Huge.
We've come kind of full circle here. If you could give me just kind of a snapshot of your career, you've had we've really kind of zoned in on the Polka Dot Door and your time at TV Ontario, but Rex, me and you both know that your career is so much broader than that. Can you give us a snapshot and just really summarize and tell us your story of how you got started, what you were involved in at first, and what you're doing today?
All right. So 1956, days of live TV. I have a brother. My brother's name is Garrick, and Garrick is 8 years older. He's an actor out of London. He's been in Star Wars and a whole raft of films. He played Biggs Darklighter in Star Wars, and he, being 8 years older, had a radio show on CBC. I had an opportunity of going down to the studio with my mom. The director of the show says, "We're doing a TV show, we need a kid, can Rex act?" My mother says, "Well, he clowns around a lot, I'm sure he can do something." And I got a lead in a TV show, had about 50 lines, something like that, at the age of 6, and never looked back. And it was an exciting kind of moment. Those are the days of, as I say, live TV, where you would rehearse the show for 2, maybe even 3 weeks in a studio. You'd go into the in a warehouse, and you'd go into the TV studio. You'd have a full day, if not 2, but at least a full day of technical rehearsal to get all the cameras, to get everything done, like a stage production. And then, and this is a piece that I always remember really vibrantly, is that moment where it is in real time. So the show's going to go on, it's GM Presents, it's 9 o'clock Sunday night, and from the control booth you hear the director, on the screen you see the show ending that's just before you. Let's pretend it's Ed Sullivan. You see that show ending, the director comes on the intercom, he says, "Okay everybody, break a leg, let's have a good show." And then you see the logo of CBC come up, and then the floor director counting you down, and you're live. And live TV, I mean, it's a buzz, a real buzz, because anything can happen. Cameras can go down, actors can stub their feet, get a nosebleed, I don't know, whatever it is, but the show goes on. So those were very early, exciting days for me. I learned a lot. I was working more than I was in school, and it was really a seminal piece to my own development and my own education. That had an opportunity of working just a whole bunch of stuff. Mostly CBC, children's shows, a lot of, a fair chunk of children's shows, but also dramas, radio shows. Radio shows were live at that time as well. That, for me, maybe it was just where I was at, but that was a much more vibrant time, even as young as I was. We had a coterie of actors, of Canadian actors that we were working with. We'd all know one another. The whole industry was much different when we were working there. So move forward to when I was 15. Had an opportunity to audition for a series that was coming up about 4 kids in a fort and out in the wilds. And so I auditioned. The series was called The Forest Rangers. It ended up shooting for 3.5 years. I was on for 2 years. I grew too much and therefore kind of worked my way out of the show, unfortunately. Fabulous opportunity. That was sold in over 50 countries. First color series ever to be sold internationally. And it's that show really that I find much, much more. And I'm blessed, I'm honored when people go, wow, I watched that show, I really loved it. We only got 2 channels and that's what we watched. It was very, very exciting. In fact, I had an occurrence literally just the other day. We were up at the cottage and I've got a picture of the Forest Rangers, the one I sent you.
Okay.
And this man walks down into our lower level at the cottage, and I've got some pictures on the walls, and he looks at it, he's like, oh gosh, that's the Forest Rangers. I remember that show. And he looks, oh my God. And it wasn't until then that he clicked that I was the guy. He says, I grew up with you. And he really, I was touched. I was touched just by the fact that I clearly had a significant impact on this guy, just as a character in a TV show. But nonetheless, it was good, clean fun sort of thing. It was just wonderful to see that he'd grown up with that, you know. So Forest Rangers, great experience, loved it. And then I finished when I was about 16, and from there migrated to a robust career doing a lot of animation work, voiceover, a lot of commercial work, a lot of children's series, just really keeping busy.
What kind of animation work did you do? What kind of shows were you involved with?
Oh, cartoon work, RoboCop, Beetlejuice, some of the early Care Bears, series like that would have been on, again, they would have been on, might have been on TVOntario actually, but maybe more CBC. And those are good fun to do. Just as an actor, you're in a studio, you watch the animation, being able to voice and put stuff behind it, good fun.
Do you remember any of the characters you played on Beetlejuice or Care Bears?
I played RoboCop. I played the lead in that. That's for sure. And Beetlejuice, I don't remember my character. It wasn't Beetlejuice. It was another character that doesn't quite come to mind.
And what about Care Bears?
Again, a supporting role kind of thing. I wasn't one of the Care Bears, but certainly I've always prided myself, and in fact, my brother's the same way, that you'll have a much longer career as an actor if you are diversified. And so being a supporting player, doing the voices that are sort of the second and third tier, more opportunity to come back and do more voices, as opposed to always just do the lead. And so basically moving on, did a lot of film work in supporting roles, which I rather enjoyed. Finally got to the place as having been married. We're now in the 80s. Married, children, mortgage, realizing that as successful as I was, I really wasn't able to earn the kind of living that I wanted to earn and sustain a family. I don't mind the audition process. It's part of being an actor. It very much is there. You go in, you audition, make the best person win, that's fine. But in Canada, it was very difficult because often the roles that were being offered were secondary roles as opposed to primary roles. Americans would be getting the primary roles. I would do a good job, and the director would wax eloquent on the job done, but it did not mean, and for all the right reasons, it did not mean that I necessarily would be hired for the next production or the next thing that director or producer was doing. And that's understandable. totally understandable, but it's like, you know what, I'm not building up a book of business. I'm not building up any referenceability. And so, again, the business side of me said, I think it's time for a change. And so I migrated out of that, not leaving the business with any sadness. Drop-In was a pivotal moment. The Polka Dot Door we've talked about, Forest Rangers, and other work that was just there. I migrated and I now do executive coaching in the area of effective business communications. So I work with senior executives, helping them speak with integrity, with clarity, be more concise, speak with authenticity. And it's not about teaching them acting techniques. It's really about trusting, having them trust me that I can help them speak so people listen. And I've been doing that now for 25 years.
That's incredible. That is just incredible. I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day, and I certainly hope that you feel honored for the influence that you've had. And you know, many who are watching this are just so thankful for your significant contribution to Canadian educational television. So, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for being willing to go down this road of memory lane and to be able to share with us some of your memories. I know that there'll be many that are interested in watching this interview, and we'll chat for a couple of minutes when we go offline here. But on behalf of everyone who will be watching, thank you, Rex, for taking the time to do this today.
Well, thank you, Travis, for the opportunity, and blessings to you for having the enthusiasm and the tenacity to do this work. It's all good. Thank you.